Hi all, I have a very interesting game to show you, which I consider maybe one of Nakamura's most outrageous chess openings ever. Played in the Tradewise Gibraltar tournament, which is currently being played, 27th of January 2015. His opponent, women grandmaster Jovana Vojinovic, is a woman grandmaster of about 2300 FIDE. D4 was played, and Nakamura chose the Dutch defence. The backdrop of this is in the Tatar still recently. Both Caruana and Magnus Carlsen played the Dutch in 2 games there, and they both lost with black. And yeah, the Dutch defence hasn't had a fantastic reputation. I think a lot of club players do play it, but a lot of players are cynical because it creates a lot of weaknesses. With weaknesses, you're kind of inviting the opponent to show off their tactical skills and prowess, and things like king safety as well come into it. So the Dutch defence, risky opening. It does do some kind of trade. It's what Magnus Carlsen considers sometimes that flank openings are the most aggressive way to play for a win, and sometimes when you play more solid defences, it often ends more in a draw. It's more likely. But this is a very fighting statement from Nakamura, the Dutch defence, and we have this anti-Dutch system, bishop g5, being played, and usually black avoids knight f6. Usually g6 or h6 here is common, but this is the third most popular move according to live books, c6. I've had a nasty experience myself personally against knight f6. White just doubles the pawns, and it can get very unpleasant, just structurally, and with d5 compromised. This can be very unpleasant for white controlling d5. So this move is much more flexible, avoids any structural issues with knight f6, and it avoids the more beaten paths. We see now e3. We're already into 65 games here on live book only, and now black playing a bit like a computer from 1970, trying for that b2 pawn. There's a certain logic to it, that the bishop has left base, it has left c1, so b2 is there to be attacked, but isn't it a poisoned pawn? We see the b2 pawn being regarded as a poisoned pawn in many different opening systems. Most notably the Sicilian defence, the poisoned pawn variation, where often white's getting crushing attacks. We see here knight d2, and Nakamura hasn't got any pieces developed. This really is starting to be an outrage if he takes here. He's not developing any pieces. But on the other hand, yeah, it's not going to be knight f6 unless he wants a dent in his structure. But maybe g6 and bishop g7 you would have thought. But here already, with knight d2, the queen is subject to further harassment with knight c4. Nakamura takes the b2 pawn, rook b1, and now he doesn't go so far as to take on a2 here. That would be, I think, pushing it too much. Here's a variation I checked out earlier. If queen takes a2, he played queen c3. If queen takes a2, then I think white has a strong move in knight c4, and black is in grave danger here, not able to get the queen back over here. The a5 square denied. Say queen a4, and white has a very good move here in e4, which allows bishop d2 in some cases. So say taking, then we see big trouble for the queen. In fact, here queen b5, there's always knight d6 check, and queen b4 doesn't help here, bishop d2, and the queen is going into that by force. So that's a way of losing the queen quickly, basically, to take on a2. Now it doesn't go that far. Pins the knight, Nakamura pins the knight, and still that possibility of getting the queen back, or maybe to d8, exists. Now we see white lashing out. This might not be technically the best move. White lashes out here, trying to maybe rip open some lines. It's the classical recipe. If the opponent's behind the development, you want to open up some lines and get to the king. The king is not yet committed to castling. In fact, castling on either side is a bit tricky with all these pieces in the way. Well, these two and these two. So nothing has really developed here. It's really quite outrageous at the moment. g4 was played, and the queen moves again. And there's a subtle threat in maybe taking, and hitting g5 or something to do with g5, but it's also protecting f5. But at the moment the queen's protecting g4, so that's not really a big deal either. G takes f5 is played. Queen takes f5. Now the bishop is hit, it's protected, and also this makes way for the possibility of bishop h3. So immediately we see, moving the d pawn, we have bishop h3 in as a skewer. So Nakamura plays queen a5. Yes, it's a strange game, this one. One of the top players in the world, flouting opening principles of development, just moving his queen, taking on b2, doing all this stuff here. Hasn't white made any visible progress? Some lines are open, but where are the attacking points? Where are the exploitable weaknesses in black's position at the moment? It's not entirely easy to see where they are, or will they be created soon? We see this move knight h3, so white has a massive lead in development, it seems, visually. I mean, even this bishop is doing something, even though it's at base. The rook's doing something, it's tying down the pieces. We see now g6. Committing to g6 seems a little bit outrageous as well. It's a target. It's actually, surely that is an exploitable weakness here, with things like h5, knight f4, rook g1, putting pressure on g6 for h5. So, isn't this a concern? White targets the g6 pawn with bishop d3. Would you really try this at home, this opening? Maybe it's something to try and blitz. I'm going to have to try it and blitz sometime. It looks a little bit on the cheeky side. It has to be said. We see now the move d6, which is maybe you could consider prophylaxis against h5. Because if h5 here, we could actually just do the forcing move, bishop takes h3. And it seems this should dissuade white. But even if we follow this through, with white losing a piece, my analysis shows actually this is really dangerous for black already, even if we lose the piece, because it's only the queen which is out here. This kind of thing here looks to be on the verge of disaster. Rook takes b7, for example, and white's got good compensation and technically is better. So maybe that sort of thing should have been really considered, just to punish Nakamura, his cheekiness, just moving his queen. Exploits the b-file pressure. The king's not going anywhere here. This looks like a very promising position. Furthermore, white has rook g3 on the cards and pushing with g7. So it seems, is black really in a position to even have this prophylaxis move d6? Is this really prophylaxis or bluff about bishop takes h3 and queen takes g5? There's just so much pressure. But white's on the safe side, plays queen f3. So now if h5, bishop takes, we can take with the queen and come to c8. So, yes, isn't this a problem, h5, now, for black? Surely. Very calm move now. Knight d7. Black wants to play knight f6 without any structural damage. Okay. We see h5. Oh dear. Things seem to be getting nasty now. Now we see knight df6, letting a pawn go, but it does develop some of black's pieces here. H takes g, h takes, you see the rook's automatically developed on its initial square. Bishop takes, and now the king is getting a bit safer, king d8. It's like two principles of development are being ticked off here, king safety and piece activity development. On the original square, they're being ticked off here. Black seems to be getting a playable position. Furthermore, with the king coming to c7, then that would mean the bishop's free. It's the safeguard of b7. We see bishop f4, king c7. And how can we say now that white is better? It seems that black is actually doing okay if there's no real concrete threats. And this is the thing about chess, concrete threats, not just the way the position looks, is often more important. What concrete threats does white have? White plays knight g5, offering an exchange of rooks. Nakamura takes this rook, queen takes, and now a concrete threat, bishop h6, hitting g5, and threatening white with structural damage if the knight moves. Bishop takes f4. So the queen just protects g5, and we see now Bishop d7. That's made possible because the king's protecting b7. The rook's now active. Bishop goes to d3. And now we see knight d5. Threatening things like taking or knight c3 to hit the rook. White has weaknesses, losing that b2 pawn. That c3 square is weak. The knight's still pinned. We see knight e6 check, which is a trade of that knight for this bishop. Bishop takes. Bishop takes. But now knight c3, hitting the rook. The rook goes to a1. And now we see queen b4, which threatens things like queen b2. Also pins the pawn. So c5 might also be interesting later. King f1, letting that pawn go. It was very difficult to do anything about that pawn in the light of queen b2. The king's actually letting the rook potentially come to e1. It's a bit of a tricky position to handle after queen b2. The rook's got e1 now. But it's let the a2 pawn go, which creates basically an automatic threat, long-term threat of this a pawn just queening. Basically, black's got a passed a pawn here. Also, the knight's been hit as well, by the way. So actually, rook d1 protecting the knight is played. Knight c3 hitting the rook again, rook e1. This is very annoying. Now Naka takes on h6. Okay, he moves the bishop now. So the a pawn is ready to run. And this pawn, you might think, can white at least try and attack this pawn? It's not really worth it here. There's an extra attack on the knight. If queen g7, black just can continue with a5, not caring about e7, because there's knight d5 hitting the queen and hitting d2. So that's not even a vulnerable pawn, the e7 pawn here. White plays f3, and black makes his intention clear. a5, just try and queen the pawn. King f2, a4, queen g5. White seems helpless, and with this move has conceded a weakness of the last move, that h8 square, which black takes up. That the rook doesn't necessarily need to be behind the pawn here. Rook h2 is a very tasty threat now. Queen g3 defending against rook h2. Knight d5 hitting the knight on d2. Rook d1. And now we see a very powerful move, c5. White's centre is being torn apart with this move. If d takes is played, then queen takes is very tasty looking on e3. Knight c4, maybe we can just kick the knight with b5, for example. So black seems to be in a very commanding position here with a passed a pawn. Huge central pressure. Great pieces, there's no bad pieces. Bishop c4 was played. Another concrete threat, knight c3 hitting the rook. Rook e1. And now b5, and white had enough of this game. The centre is crumbling here at minimum. The bishop hasn't got any great squares here. d5 is covered by the knight. On f7, there's just, for example, c takes looks good. White centre's just crumbling. Black still got the a pawn. White resign here. So this is arguably one of Nakamura's most outrageous openings that I've personally seen. It must be in the top 10 or top 5 at least, if not the most outrageous of his modern like grandmaster level games. What an opening. What do you think about this game? Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.